Okay. So for Michal, it's she's in the East Coast, so it's good evening, Michal, and we're here. It is our lunchtime here. So good afternoon. I'm Sagit. I work at the JCC Los Gatos, and I'll just introduce Michal, and we'll go from here. I don't want to take a lot of her time. So Michal Bar-Asher Siegal is a scholar of rabbinical Judaism. Her work focuses on aspects of Jewish-Christian interactions in the ancient world and compares early Christian and rabbinical sources. She is a faculty member at the Goldstein-Goren Department of Jewish Thought at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and she was an elected member of the Israel Young Academy of Sciences. During the past academic year, she was a visiting professor in Judaic studies at Yale University. She has written multiple award-winning books, and we are so happy to have her with us today. Thank you, Michal.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay? Good. So you just let me know how long do I have to speak?
We have 45 minutes.
Perfect.
So for us, it is like from 2:45 until 3:30.
Okay.
And if you'll need 5 more minutes or 10, we'll be okay.
That's okay. No, I'll stand by my time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. And I want to tell you a little bit about myself before I start my presentation. So I teach at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, as Sagit said, in the Department of Jewish Thought. And I deal basically with the ancient time. I deal with the 1st century CEs, and I want to ask the question of what was the relationship between Jews and Christians at that early time period. And I look at it through the Babylonian Talmud. This is an interesting text that really became the most important text for Jewish culture, and we'll talk about it today a little bit. But the question is, how much do Jews and Christians know about each other? A little bit about my background. I live in Jerusalem with my husband and 3 kids. I have 3 boys. And we are spending the year in New Haven, Connecticut, at Yale University as visiting professors. My husband is also a professor of linguistics. And I'm very happy to be here and tell you a little bit about my research that is really done as part of what we do at Ben-Gurion University, which is really bringing together different methodologies and using it to really introduce and produce groundbreaking research in the field, in this case, in the field of religious studies and Jewish thought and how it interacts with the world around it. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm a graduate of Yale University, did my postdoc at Harvard, and really started teaching at Ben-Gurion in 2010. And let's do some studying together. Let me share my screen. Sorry. Just a second. Go. Okay. So can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Good.
We can see your screen.
Wonderful. So basically what I want to do today is read a story with you. But before I read a story with you from the Babylonian Talmud, a little word of introduction about the background to this story and where we're at historically. So when we were looking at the past of the ancient past, we have 2 major empires at that time period. We have the Roman Empire, which, as you can see, I don't know if you can see my pointer. There we go. As you can see, the land of Israel, for example, is the most eastern province of the Roman Empire. You can see the end of the world empire, but this is the Roman Empire. Rome is about here. So this is the Roman Empire, but there's a second empire that some time period called the Persian Empire, which is situated around here, right? This is and at that time period, what we're talking about is called the Sasanian Empire. It's just the name of the Persian Empire, and this is what we call modern day Iran and Iraq, but it's called really the Persian Empire at that point. And this is the area that we're interested in, and this is the area that we're focused on, and this is the area that produced the text that we read today. So when we're looking at the Persian Empire, and if I'm doing like a zoom in on this area, right? So this is the Persian Gulf and the 2 rivers leading into it, the Tigris and the Euphrates, right? leading into the Persian Gulf, right? So this is here, this area here. So when we're looking at the map, the area between those two rivers, the narrow area, is where the Jews live. This is where the Jews lived during the time of the Babylonian Talmud, Talmudic time, and they live in between those two rivers, and this is where they live. Now, the question is that I want to ask today, and this is the question that I ask in my research, is what's the connection between Jews and Christians in this area? Did they have anything to do with one another? And if they did, how much? And in what way did that influence, effect, have any meaning on the creation of Judaism and Christianity in the 1st century CE? Because the time period we're talking about, this is exactly the time period where Christianity comes into the historical form, wins, becomes really the major religion of the ancient time, but really becomes what it is. And at the same time, rabbinic Judaism becomes what it is, right? As opposed to biblical Judaism that lived beforehand, rabbinic Judaism, that's exactly the same time period. So I'm looking at that time period, and I'm looking at that area between the rivers where the Jews live, and I'm asking, what was the connection between Jews and Christians in that area? Now, the text that was produced in that very area that we're talking about, this narrow area where all the Jews live, is called the Babylonian Talmud. Now, you know, the Jews are called the people of the book, and that's a name that was given to them and other groups by the Quran, right? The Quran calls the Jews the people of the book because of the Bible, because the Jews bring into the world the book, the Bible. But the truth is that the most influential book or corpus or composition, most important for Jewish culture, is actually the Babylonian Talmud, and not the Bible. This is a text that was composed edited around the 6th or 7th century CE, but has tradition going back to Second Temple period. So going really 600 years or 500 years of tradition found around the year 0 all the way to the 6th or 7th century when this text has been redacted. And we have a lot of traditions about the Jewish people redacted in this book. And this composition, this Babylonian Talmud, becomes the most important book for Jewish culture by the 11th century. So really, really the book that defines what Jews do, what Jews think. I live in a country in Israel where actually people live their life according to what that's found in this book. There's laws in my country that are governed, the divorce law, for example, that are governed by what's found in this book. So this is really the central book important for Jewish culture. And again, I'm a scholar of this literature, and I have to say, you're hearing from one of only 2 women professors in Israel that teach this literature. This was traditionally studied and taught by men. So the fact that we're learning this and asking these questions is all new and exciting. And then really the question that I want to bring to the fore is what this text has to teach us about Jewish-Christian interaction. Did they have anything to do with each other, and in what ways? So that's my question for today. And that's what we're going to explore a little bit today. So when we're looking at Christianity in that area, and that's the question we want to ask, so let's start with the geography, right? So this is a map that was done in 2010 by a scholar named Julian. And again, look at the map again. We have the Persian Gulf and the 2 rivers leading down to it, right? The Tigris and the Euphrates, right? Leading into the Persian Gulf. Remember the narrow area where all the Jews live? And this is the map of where the Christians live. So we have monasteries and we have villages where the Christians live. And as you can see from this map, there were very much Christian in this area, and as opposed to what scholars used to think in the past, that there were no Christians and there's no use in asking those questions, the truth is we definitely do need to look at this area to ask about Jewish-Christian interaction. That's what I do in my research. And I'm going to show you a map that I'm actually kind of proud of, because this is the first time that this map was actually created, and it was created by me. And just to show you how new and exciting this research is, that no one has ever created that map before, what I try to do is basically learn from the text about the people, right? So I'm going to read the Talmud, I'm going to ask questions about Jewish interaction. We're going to do this together. I'm going to read the text together and ask that question together, but we're going to learn from the text about the people who created those texts, right? So we're going from the text to the people. And in order to do that, I want to have that map in mind. I want you all to remember this map, right? The Persian Gulf and the 2 rivers leading down into it, right? And what I did is I took the map with Julian, the one that we saw in 2010, right? And I put on top of it the Jewish map of the Jewish area, just to show you how Jews and Christians live side by side. And that should be our default assumption when we're looking at Jewish-Christian interaction. And we should then say, well, then, if Jews and Christians live side by side so closely, just want to point out this area, especially Seleucus Sifon, which was the capital of the Christian community, right across the river from the Jews. If this is the case, if Jews and Christians live side by side, did they have anything to do with one another? I'm sure you can guess from my enthusiasm about that question that my answer is a very much a positive one. I really think they did have a lot to do with one another, but how and in what way? That's all new, and we're discovering this as we speak. This is, again, brand new, and I'm happy to share with you some of the results of my study. So what we're going to do today, we're going to ask, if Jews and Christians talk to each other, do they only fight? One of the famous passages in the Talmud deal with Jewish-Christian interaction, and when they talk about Jesus, for example, right? So they talk about Jesus, they say all kinds of things about Jesus, and it's very polemical in nature. There's a lot of fighting about this. So that's like the famous passages about Christianity. Today, I want to actually turn away from polemic and talk a little bit about different kinds of interaction. And for that, I want to read some Talmud with you guys. So let's read some Talmud. This text that I'm going to read with you is taken from my book, as you can see from the side. This is my first book, Early Christian Monastic Literature in the Babylonian Talmud. And for that, I want to talk a little bit and spend some time to talk about the art that I chose for the front of my book. So this is thanks to my friend, Sarah Oppenberg, who actually teaches in the art department at Ben-Gurion University, my university in the Negev. And she, every time I need to choose like art for my books and stuff, she's the first person I call to, and she never fails to give me really great results. And when I said to her, listen, I want to introduce in my book texts that we're going to read today, one of which actually try to show that the rabbis had a lot to do with Christianity and specifically with monks. That's what we'll do today. And I said, how am I going to find something that represents visually the connection between Jews and monks? And she said, oh, no problem. And she pulled out this beautiful pictures from a Bible made for the King of France in the 13th century called Bible Muraliste. This is the Bible, and it's a seriously gorgeous, gorgeous big one, like filled with like beautiful, beautiful decorations on the side. And in one corner of them, some of them have like roundy thingies on the fourth corner. So one of the pages, there's this one. And I kind of like, made it bigger and, paid for the rights to use it for my book. And look what it showed, right? So this is a scene from the 13th century where Jews were forced to listen to lessons from monks. This was part of the education of the Jews in medieval time in certain areas. And in this area, but look what we have. We have the Jews and we have the monks. You can recognize the monks. Let's start with the monks. That's an easy one. That's the side, right? This is the monks. And how do we recognize them? They have this like bold patch right on the top of their head. That was the way the monks used to shave their heads and do some kind of I don't know if you saw the movie with Sean Connery and Christian Slater named Name of the Rose. This is an Umberto Eco movie book that was done into a movie. I highly recommend Sean Connery in his good days. So as you can see, they're all in the movie. Now, why I'm referring to this movie, they're all like, wearing their hair this way. And look at the long garb of the monks, right? Like trailing on the floor. This is the monks. But on the opposite side, we have the Jews. How do we know that they're Jews? I'm guessing maybe you can guess. Look at their heads, right? You see they have this like pointy hats on their head. They're covering their hair. And this is a very good sign that we're talking about Jews. Jews cover their hair, and they had specific hats that they wore, kind of equivalent of yarmulke or kippah of today, right? So they had like pointy hats, and you can recognize the Jews by the way they were dressed, and obviously look shorter robes as opposed to the monks, right? So you can see them. And the thing is that what did I like about this scene, and this is why I chose this from my book, is that they're arguing over a book, right? This is obviously a biblical book that stands in the middle because the lessons that the Jews were forced to listen were biblical lessons from the Christian monks. And right, so the monks are preaching, and look at the Jews, they're not happy about what they're being taught, right? They're upset and they're yelling, and you can see their body language. But look at the Jew in the front, and this is why I love this picture so much. I love that he's portraying both an outward and an inward movement, right? He's obviously upset and he turns away, but his body turns towards scripture. And I think it kind of really portrayed what I wanted to show, that there was conversation between Jews and Christian, and specifically between monks and the Babylonian Talmud 100 years earlier, but that there's this complex sense of togetherness because we study the same biblical text, but also staying away from and defining one against the other. And how do we work with this complicated back and forth, right? And how do we like it? Do we not like it? Do we want to hear what they have to say? Do we not? How do we deal with that? So the complexity of it is exactly what I try to cover in my book. So this is the cover of my book, just to give you first a plug into my book, and second to talk about the research and what I try to basically portray in the text. So far so good. This is art and introduction, and now we're going to start reading the text.
Michal, just a second. If there is a question in the chat, do you want me to read it or to wait for the end?
We'll wait for the question until the end, if that's okay.
Okay.
You will some stops in the middle to, well, let's see the question. Any connection to Mitzrayim, the narrow place with the geographical narrow place between the rivers? No, Mitzrayim is in Egypt. It's a different place. And this is between the rivers. That's a different area altogether. But it's a good question, because the really Mitzrayim, the rabbis actually, I like this question because the rabbi took the word Mitzrayim and really read it like you did, to say between the narrow places, right? Because the Jews were in a narrow place between, they were in trouble. So that's nice that you take the geographical or the phonetical meaning and understand it as something difficult. In this case, it's a different geographical area, but I think that's kind of maybe represent what the Jews were facing. So that's a nice thought to have, but a different geographical area. So thank you for that question. Okay, I'll try to follow. If I see there's a question, then I'll stop and read it. Okay, if I don't, bug me, and then they'll do. Okay. I promised the text, but before the text, a few more words of introduction. Let's talk a little bit about monasticism. What are monks and where do they come from? So monks is the part of a movement called monasticism that really started in the 3rd and 4th century CE. They live here. By the way, this is an old picture of monks in the desert, but look at the geographical area. So if we talked about, I've asked about Egypt, this is the area we're talking about. This is Egypt. This is the Nile, right? And the area where the Nile starts is called the Delta, right? This is the very rich and full of water and very fruitful area of the beginning of the Niles, and this is it. And this is where monasticism starts. Most of Egypt is uninhabitable. You can't live. It's a very severe desert. But so the people who live next to the Nile in this area, this is where they live, and this is where monasticism starts. This is where the monk starts. So what happens? In the 3rd and the 4th century, a new movement starts. This movement is of holy men, people who consider themselves to be holy. They separate from their family, they separate from their life, and they go into the desert, and they go into secluded area, they go into caves, and they live on their own. And the society at this point believed them to be holy men by the sheer fact that they went and lived on their own, and they do this like meditation, and so they believed to be able to perform miracles and talk to animals and bring rain and can live without water or food or sleep for long periods of time. And they're considered what we call holy men. And what's interesting enough, they become the rock star of the ancient world. Everyone wants to hear about those holy men, going alone into the cave and being isolated. And the reason we know is that we actually have a lot of writings about them. People, as soon as they start, hiding on their own, people come to visit them, and we have pilgrimage to see them, and they write what they say. And it's all the language of the ancient world, Greek and Latin and Coptic and Syriac and Aramaic, and people write what they have to say. And we have a lot of, copies of this, and people tell about meeting with them and what they do. And so this is like, I don't know, the rock star of the ancient world that everyone reads about. How you go out in the supermarket and on the left you have all those tabloids that tell you about the celebrities and what they do. That's what we have about holy men. They're all over the place. Everyone wants to hear what they have to say about spirituality and God and how to live a religious life. So it's all over the place, and a very popular movement. So popular, you can see that also in the land of Israel. This is right on the way to the Dead Sea. If you go on the street on your left next to Kfar Adumim, and that area, you actually see this Vadi Kelt, it's called, or Emek Kidron, and you can actually see those monasteries that they go back to the 5th century And slowly from the caves, they built a monastery on the side of the mountain to where really all those holy men lived on their own. And you have monasteries of that time period. So really going back to the beginning of monasticism. And the question is, does the Babylonian Talmud have anything to do with this literature? And I'll try to suggest it is. And for this, finally, we get to read some rabbinic literature. So we start with a passage that's found in the Palestinian Talmud. This is a text that was redacted around the 5th century in the land of Israel. And there we find the following story. The following story tells us about a guy named Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And this is a very tiny story, and he says the following. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, for 13 years, he was hidden in a cave of cherubs, and he stayed there until his body became afflicted with a skin disease that looked like rust spots. That's it. Then the story continues, what happens when he comes out of the cave, and blah, blah, blah. Now, interestingly enough, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we know, lived around the 2nd century CE in the land of Israel, but we don't have records of him from that time period in Palestinian sources. Only in later sources, such as the Palestinian Talmud, that was redacted in the 5th century CE, do we hear about his stay in the cave, which is interesting enough, right? So we only have later stories telling about him, and very, very short, right? 13 years in a cave. What happens is that when you get to the Babylonian Talmud, this is in Tractate Shabbat, this is the text that we're going to read, look at the difference in size, right? This is the short story in the Palestinian Talmud. That's the Babylonian Talmud. Much longer story, but the same guy living in a cave. And this is what we're going to read together now. Before we're going to read about the Babylonian Talmud, a little bit of a history. When we're talking about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we know he lived during the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Bar Kokhba revolt was a revolt against the Romans that happened around the year 132. For a few years, the Jews fight against the Roman and they lose miserably. But what we do know, and really catastrophically, I must say, and what we do know though, that when they were fighting, they used caves to fight the Romans. We actually have, as you can see here, I don't know if you can see that this is like a drawing of a bunch of caves connected together underground. So they would like fight the Romans and go underground into the cave. This is a very effective fighting mechanism. So we know that they actually prepared for the rebellion against the Romans, and they ended this very well. By the way, you can actually go and run in those caves today. There's one right next to my house, and famously, I let my kids run around, and I had this bright idea to do that in one of the Passover seders in the Eve of. I said they'll run around and then they'll be tired and sleep before the seder, and it never happened. And it just arrived to the seder, it's completely bunkered and tired. But they had fun running around the caves. But in any case, this is the caves of Bar Kokhba revolt. So this is kind of signals that the story that we're having is very Jeremy is saying that she visited the cave. They are very cool. In any case, I highly suggest everyone to do it, and they're found in several places next to Jerusalem. But in any case, the grain of the story, the grain of truth of the story, the historical grain seems to be going back to some of the Bar Kokhba revolt that people actually hid in caves during the revolt. So that kind of explains why he was hidden, even though the story itself doesn't tell us who is he hiding from, where is he hiding, right? It just tells us that he was there for 13 years. So that's just about the historical background. Now, back to the story in the Talmud. So when we go to the Babylonian Talmud and we read the story at length, the story is much longer. And let's see what it says. So the story says the following. They went and hid in a cave. So the story in the Babylonian Talmud, this is a story that's longer, but also includes the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and not just on his own, right? So he goes with his son and hides in a cave, and he says the following. They went and hid in a cave, he and his son. And then they said, the miracle occurred, and a carob tree and a water well was created for them, right? So what does the Talmud do here? The Talmud says, wait, what do you mean they stayed in the cave for 13 years? What did they eat? What did they drink, right? What did they do? So the Talmud supplies that information and said there was a miraculous tree of cherubs and a miraculous fountain of water, right? A well. And this is how they lived. By the way, I don't know if you know what cherub trees are. I kind of discovered that Americans don't know what cherubs are, but in Israel, they're all over the place. These are very They look like moon-shaped, very hard black thingies, and they're extremely nutritious. Some parents try to pass off them as chocolate for their kids. It doesn't work. It's not even close, but still, it's extremely nutritious. And you can actually, someone actually checked, can you live off it on its own? But you actually can't. But the writer of the story didn't know that. But they are very nutritious. But in any case, that's the story tells that this is what he lives off, right? A tree and water. Now, the story continues. They would strip their garments and sit up into their necks in sand, right? The whole day they studied, and when it was time for prayers, they robbed, covered themselves, prayed, and then put off their garments again so that they should not wear out, right? So the story tells us that what did they do all day? They studied Torah, and then 3 times a day, they would get out of the stand, dressed in their clothes, pray, and then take off their clothes, put it on the side, and go back into the stand. Just imagine what it is. So the story does 2 things, right? It explains to us first, what did they do for clothing, right? If they're hidden in a cave for 13 years, what would they wear, right? Their clothes would wear out. So the story explains how they have clothes, because they only wear it 3 times a day for their prayer, and then they put them away for the rest of the time. Also, so what do? They can't study Torah when they're naked, right? So they sit in sand all day long. And also, like, just imagine the picture of, right, just talking heads, right? Thinking like the band, right? So talking heads, they're like sitting in the sand, and they're just heads left. The imagery, right, of just studying and just dedicating your entire self for spirituality and study, because there's just heads popping out from the sand. It's an incredibly powerful picture. So that's what the Talmud does, right? It tells us what they do all day long. It tells us what they do for clothing. It tells us what they do for drink and water. All of this information was not found in the original story, right? So this is later on. And then the story goes on to say, they dwelt 12 years in the cave. Remember, we had 13 years in the Palestinian Talmud. So in the Babylonian Talmud, it's just 12. And then the story says, Elijah came and stood at the entrance to the cave and exclaimed, who will inform the son of Yochai that the emperor is dead and his decree annulled? So we have all of a sudden a new figure that appears on the stage, which is Elijah. And he doesn't go into the cave. He stands outside and he yells, like, who will tell them, right? He doesn't go in. He says, who will tell them that they can come out, right? So something happens with the Romans and they're no longer seeking after them. So they hear that and they emerge. They come out of the cave. And then they see a man plowing and sowing. Right? So they see men working the land. And they exclaim, right? They're very, very they forsake life eternal and engage in life temporal. Right? They can't understand. If someone has the choice between studying Talmud or studying Torah or working, why would anyone choose work if you can study, right? I always ask that question, right? Like, I love my profession. I don't know why anyone would do anything else, but still, right? So that's the question. Why would you work the land, right? How do you do this? By the way, this is a tension that's always found in any spiritual community. The tension between Torah v'avodah, ora and labora, work and study. How much time do you dedicate for your soul, and how much time do you dedicate for the fact that you need to work, right? So they come out of the cave where they lived as talking heads. They just studied all day long, and they had miraculous food. They don't understand why anyone would want to work, right? So they're very, very upset about this. And then whatever they cast their eyes upon was immediately burned out. I forgot to tell you that rabbis, when they're very, very upset, have the power to burn with their eyes. And this is what they do this time, right? So they're very, very upset and they burn the place up. But then God gets very upset. A heavenly voice comes forth and cried out, have you emerged to destroy my world? Return to your cave, says the voice, right? So they returned and dwelt there 12 months, saying the punishment of the wicked in Gehenna is limited to 12 months. So God punishes them by putting them back in the cave for 12 months. Notice what we did. We had the 12 years and then 1 more year, so we reached 13, just like in the other story. But in this case, look what happened in the last year. The last year is the punishment. The cave is no longer a hiding place from the Roman. This is a place for spiritual awakening, for spiritual understanding, right? They need to understand something about human nature, which they do in the cave, right? So they do this. And then after 12 months, a heavenly voice releases them from the cave. So then the story continues. I'm going to stop here because this is what I want to focus on. So what is the story? So the Talmud obviously expands on the very short narrative in the Yerushalmi, but it also does something else. And I want to read some monastic stories for you, some stories about the monks. We'll start reading, and I think you'll see what I want to do. Let's read the popular literature of the time. This is what Christian reads. This is what the whole world reads about holy men. And this is the story that Jerome, one of the church fathers in the 4th century, tells us about the early monks. And he says, those first monks, you know what, I'm going to skip this one and go to the second one because I see we're running out of time. Jerome tells us about one monk, and then Paphnutius tells us about another monk, and this is the story I want to focus on. And he said, this is the story about Abba Timothy. Who's Abba Timothy? I was glad Abba Timothy, this guy, was happy to flee from my sin with that woman. He has some thoughts about women. He doesn't like it, and he goes into the desert. And I arose and came to the desert, and I renounced everything between myself and that woman, right? And what does he do when he goes to the desert? I found this spring of water and this cave and this date palm tree. And my life was fixed like this. The palm tree produces 12 bunches of dates each year, one each month. And this bunch from a single palm tree lasts me for 30 days at a time. And after the 30 days, another bunch goes in its place. And I have no bread for food, and my hair has continued to grow, and my clothes have completely worn out. Now I clothe with the hair of my head what should be respectfully covered. So we have a story, and the one that I skipped is very similar as well. In that one, he goes away, he runs away from the Roman. In this case, he runs away from his sin and a woman. But in any case, they run into the desert for different reasons. But what happens is that when they get to the desert, those early monks and the early holy men, they found caves, and they find caves with miraculous fountain of water and miraculous trees that give them all the food that they need. They fall in love with this place, and they no longer hide, and they no longer run away from their previous life, but they choose this as a place of spiritual awakening. And notice something else, they also worried about what to wear, right? They have to be modest and how to cover their body. In one case, this is the hair grows too long, and in the other, in the story that we skipped, the tree gives, the leaves of the tree gives them covering. So we have this sense of first covering their body, right? What do you do with the clothes? What do you do all day? What do you drink in water, right? What do you eat? What do you drink? And the cave as a place of spiritual awakening. What am I trying to say? I'm basically trying to say that when the Babylonian Talmud takes short anecdote about a rabbi hiding in a cave from the Romans, it takes it and expands it a little bit like I did today. Remember when I was trying to teach you all kinds of stuff about the monasticism, I used references for a movie with Sean Connery, right? And we talked a little bit about other references from modern day, right? I talked about, archaeological site in Israel of today. I used examples to clarify what I mean by referring to the modern world we live in, right? Where Sean Connery is a figure that I can point out to demonstrate things. Same thing, this is what the Babylonian Talmud does, right? It takes a story from the Palestinian Talmud and expands it using very popular literature about holy men and taking literary motifs from that literature to expand the Palestinian nuclear story and make it very similar to contemporaneous, very popular stories about holy men, right? It makes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai into a monk in a sense, right? Again, totally kosher. He studied Torah with his son. The word Christianity is not mentioned. It's not about Christianity, but it is about ascetic life and becoming a holy man and living in a cave and dedicating your life to the study and relying on miraculous tree and miraculous fountain of water and doing this ascetic life, talking about it and making it into a literary creation that's very, very similar to what we find in contemporaneous Christian literature. What does that mean? It's a good question. What does that mean? First and foremost, it means, and that don't forget, that was the question that we started with. Whoever composed that story knew enough about Christianity to create it, right? He knew enough about monastic literature, which, as I said, was extremely popular, to use it to better describe Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, his own rabbi, who's a completely rabbinic rabbi in all sense of the world, but used that literary motif to create Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the image of contemporaneous holy men of the time. That's number one. But for me as a historian, that's very important. I just proved that the rabbinic author had knowledge of Christianity. Not only had they had knowledge of Christianity, they're thinking about very similar issues, right? What do you do when you're on your own? How much how much you dedicate to work and versus play? And they're okay with thinking with modern, for their time, right? Their contemporaneous literature, even though it comes from the Christian monks, to think about rabbinic motifs. That's extremely interesting. It teaches so much about religious communities and conversation. Let's do one more example before we go back to that conclusion. That's another text, this time from the Apostolic Patrum, the Sayings of the Desert Fathers, and look at the following story. The story tells about a brother, one of the monks, who go to see Abba Silvanus on Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai has a very famous monastery, from very early time. And he goes to visit the other monks. And he sees the brothers, the monks, working hard the land. Right? He sees them working the land. It's very, very upset. And he says to them, do not labor the rich for the food which perish, but for the meat which endure into everlasting life. Right? That sounds familiar, right? A monk looks at the other monks working the land and he gets very upset. Why would you? And he criticizes them in the same words that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai criticizes the others, the Jews, right? By saying, how can you choose working the land? What can you study and you can do the spiritual work, right? The same word. We're, conflicting everlasting life and temporal life, right? And conflicting the two in the very same way. And he's very, very upset. Now, the story goes on to say, the old man, right, the guy, Abba Silvanus, who he came to visit, says to his disciples, fine, give him a book and put him in a cell, right? So the guy takes the book, goes into the cell on his own, study on. But then the hour comes for dinner. And no one comes to get it. And he gets very upset and his stomach starts rumbling and he's very, very upset. So he goes up and he calls to the monk and he says to him, have the brothers not eaten today? Why did no one call me for dinner? I'm hungry. And he says, no, we ate. And he says, why didn't you call me? And he said, oh, I thought you didn't need to eat, right? You were a spiritual man. You criticized that for working the land and growing cucumbers or whatever. And you don't need to eat, right? So you're a spiritual man, so we didn't call you. So he gets it and he apologizes and he understands that people need to work the land. Now, look again. How does the guy learn his lessons about the tension between working and studying, right? This tension between the two. He learns it by going into a cave on his own for a period, right? The cave or the cell, the isolation, is a time period where we reflect about your life and you reflect about balances and you learn things very similarly to the story in the Talmud, right? They come out of the cave. They're very spiritual. They're very into their thing of studying. And then they're taught a lesson about the need for the both of the two, right? The spiritual versus the working of the land, the necessity of working the land, this balance that everyone has to consider, they learn it by going back into their cave. So let me stop here and get to my conclusion. Oh, I see there's a comment. Let's see what the comment is. Let's see. Alva writes another comment. Let's see. That reminds me of Dharma. Let's see. A monk was busy sweeping the garden. One of his fellow monks wandered by and saw him busy at work and commented, very busy. The first monk, who the sweeping, looked up and said, you should know that there is one who is not busy. The second monk said, well, in that case, there are two moons in the sky. First monk took a broom, held it up and said, which moon is this? Abba, do you want to explain the story?
Well, I don't know if I can explain it, but it reminds me of the tension you were talking about between the spiritual life and the physical working life. And I think to me, this Dharma is kind of blurring the lines between the two and saying that it can be both, I think, to me.
Wow, very interesting. Thank you for that. And I'm happy actually always to see that there's what I like about your example and I like about the story that I brought to you is that the fact that you really can see that the tension between, we all think about that tension, right? So how much time do we spend on spiritual life and how much time we spend about actually needing to eat, right? And working for our life. And how do we balance this? And this is actually common for all religious communities. It's a good segue to reach my conclusion for today. Basically, what I want to say is that religious communities in conversation and contact are in conversation. They think about similar issues. They think about similar topics, right? They think about, what does it mean to be on your own? What does it mean to dedicate your entire life to study? And that's okay. That's how religious communities were in conversation with each other always through history until this modern time. And that's something that human beings do. They learn from each other and they think about similar issues. That's number one. And this is your example of is a very good one. Number two is that for historical reasons, for me to know that the rabbis knew about contemporaneous Christian literature and represent them in their literature and represent rabbis as part of that literature using literary motifs of the time is an actual historical evidence of contact between Jews and Christian in the ancient world. That's new. That's never been done before. And we finally know for the first time that they did have contact. Again, don't forget, Talmudic story doesn't have the word Christianity in it, doesn't have anything that represents Christians. And you have to know the Christian literature to know what they're doing. So much so, and here I'll finish, is that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, this guy in the cave, becomes the hero of a very famous book called the Zohar in the Middle Ages. That is the basis of the Kabbalah. You heard Madonna had a period of the time. This was a big hit in Hollywood at some point. But this is he became the center of that attention because of his special powers of spirituality and really was used as a tool, as a literary tool to talk about issues that become the center focus of so many people after that, all based on the story that uses literary tropes from monastic literature, which I think is a very good way to stop and say, look how much religious communities are in contact and how much they influence each other and how important it is to talk about that development of communities in contact and how much it really is important for understanding intellectual historical processes and development of religion. So that's what I do in my research, and I'm happy that I was able to introduce that to you guys today. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and you can find my email online wherever, just Google my name. I'm happy always to hear from my students and answer any further questions. And I hope you enjoy your rest of your day.
Michal, I want to thank you so much. My name is Jeremy Schechter. I am the Philanthropic Relationship Officer for Americans for Ben-Gurion University. We are very, very happy to bring Michal virtually to the community. I work with folks in the Bay Area. I used to live in Los Gatos myself, so I miss it very, very much. And we're very happy to be a part in collaborating with Jewbilee this year. And hopefully next time Michal is in the Bay Area, we can do a meetup in person. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Michal, and thank you, Sagit, and the whole team at Jewish Silicon Valley for collaborating with us. And thank you all for joining us today. I can, if you'd like, Sagit has my information, or I can include in the chat if anyone would like to learn more about the work that we do for Americans for Ben-Gurion University. We raise money and awareness about the incredible research that's coming out of the Negev. Brilliant minds like Michal, and we have, brilliant minds that talk about cybersecurity and sustainability and climate change, and, you name it, we do it. But Michal is really the heart and soul of the important work that's coming out of the Negev. So just wanted to say thank you. And we will be sharing information. We have a big national event we do in April called Celebrating the Remarkable Three, and we'll be focusing on pioneering medical science. And so that will be a virtual hybrid event, and hopefully Jewish Silicon Valley will be collaborating and sharing that information with us as well. So thank you so much.
Thank
really
you.
Enjoyed learning on a Sunday afternoon. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michal. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we have another session that's starting shortly at 3:45. And you are all welcome to join us. Bye.